A young billionaire walked in on his maid one quiet afternoon, singing and dancing as she cleaned the mug teacup, completely lost in the moment. She didn't notice him standing by the door, watching quietly. He stood still, listening. For the first time in years, his heart felt light. It wasn't just her voice, it was the feeling behind it. Every sway of her body spoke of a life that had known hardship, but had not lost hope. In that moment, something inside him changed. He knew his life would never be the same again. Grab your popcorn, sit back, and get ready for one of the most powerful stories you've ever heard. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button to support more inspiring stories like this. The house was always quiet. Not the happy kind of quiet, but a heavy, pressing quiet that makes everything feel cold. And even the air you breathed seems to be against you. Meera stood by the sink, washing a shiny glass cup. She was only 24, but her eyes looked older than her age. She had grown up fast, learning early that the world was rarely fair. She worked for Mr. Damon, the youngest billionaire in the country. He was smart, calm, and he was always so serious. A man who had everything the world could give him, yet seemed to carry a loneliness that wealth could not fill. His fiancée, Bella, also lived in the house. She was beautiful, full of pride, and sharp with words sharp as arrows that could pierce confidence in an instant. "Meera!" Bella shouted from across the room. Meera wiped her hands on her apron and ran to the living room. "Yes, ma'am," she said softly, bowing her head. Bella's eyes narrowed at the black shoes lying on the rug. "These shoes are not yet cleaned. Didn't I tell you yesterday to clean them? I'll shine them now, ma'am," Meera replied. Her voice was calm, but her heart felt heavy. "Oh, so I have to remind you before you actually do your job? You're just good for nothing," Bella snapped, her words like knives. Just then, the door clicked open. Mr. Damon walked in, wearing a dark suit, his face calm and unreadable. He looked around the room, said nothing, and walked upstairs. Bella's voice immediately softened into sweet honey. "Welcome home, darling." He only nodded and continued upstairs. Meera picked up the shoes, steadying her hands while her heart ached. That night, lying on her small bed in the staff room, she pulled out a worn photo of her late mother, smiling from her cupboard. "Just one more day, Mommy," she whispered. She didn't know that the next day would change everything. Meera's life had always been about doing the right thing quietly. She had grown up in a small house on the edge of the city with her mother, a woman who worked tirelessly to provide for her daughter. Meera had learned to cook, clean, and care for others from the time she could walk. But more than chores or hard work, her mother had taught her that kindness and dignity were worth more than wealth, and that a pure heart could shine, even in the darkest times. She remembered the evenings they would sit by the small window in their home, the sky turning gold, the wind rustling through the thin curtains. Her mother would hum a lullaby as Meera helped set the table. "My dear," her mother would say, "people will judge you by what they see, but never forget what's inside counts more than anything outside." Meera had clung to these words, even when the world seemed unkind. Even now, standing in the grand mansion of Damon, she carried her mother's lessons like a shield. The next morning, Meera woke early, as always. She moved quietly through the large mansion, cleaning, cooking, and polishing until everything sparkled. Not long after, Bella entered the kitchen in a silk robe. "Meera, make me a smoothie. It mustn't be too cold. I don't want another mistake today." "Yes, ma'am," Meera replied, bowing her head. As Meera worked, she reflected on her life. She had never wanted fame or wealth. She only wanted small moments of peace, a chance to feel her own worth. And maybe, just maybe, someone to see her as more than her station. Later, while cleaning the guest room, she found a small bottle of perfume. She smiled. It smelled just like her mother's favorite scent. For a brief moment, the memories of home and love softened her heart. Downstairs, Bella laughed loudly on a phone call. She's just the maid. I don't even know why Damon keeps her." Meera heard every word, but this time, she didn't cry. She simply smiled softly to herself. A small voice whispered inside her, "One day, they'll see you for who you truly are." Soon, Bella left for a business trip. Before leaving, she instructed Damon, "Tell the maid not to touch my things." Then she turned to Meera. "Stay out of the master bedroom. It's not for people like you." "Yes, ma'am," Meera replied. The car drove off, leaving silence in its wake. Back in the kitchen, Meera smiled. There would be no shouting for a little while. She turned on the radio on the table. A soft R&B song began to play. Slowly, she started humming, then swaying, then dancing. Her heart felt alive again, like it had remembered how to breathe. "Why am I still in this uniform?" she thought, smiling. She ran to her little room and opened a small suitcase. At the bottom lay her favorite dress, a simple red one she had saved for months to buy. She wore it, brushed her hair, and studied her reflection. She smiled, then rushed back to the kitchen. Back in the kitchen, she danced barefoot on the shiny floor. She sang the lullaby her mother had sung, letting her voice fill the house. It was soft, but strong, floating like warm light through the rooms. Meera didn't notice that Damon's meeting had been cancelled. He opened the front door and stopped. He heard music, her voice, full and real. He followed the sound upstairs and saw her through the doorway dancing, singing, as he stepped inside. Damon was surprised. For the first time, the house didn't feel like a war zone. When he laughed softly, Meera froze and turned. "Sir, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were home." "It's fine," he said gently. She blushed. "I'll just change and go back to work." He stepped closer. "You sing beautifully, and you dance like the song belongs to you." Meera didn't know what to say. She simply nodded. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the city, spilling golden light through the tall windows of the mansion. Meera was awake before the first rays touched the polished floors. She quietly made her way to the kitchen, careful not to disturb the silence. She moved like a shadow, sweeping the floor, wiping counters, and arranging the breakfast table just as Bella liked it. Every movement was precise, practiced over months of repetition, but her mind was elsewhere thinking of small dreams she had long buried. "If only I could sing without fear," she thought. "If only someone would hear me without judgment." The thought made her smile softly. She set down a tray with fresh fruit and tea. For a moment, she imagined her mother sitting across from her, nodding in approval. Her mother had always believed that Meera's heart was too big to be hidden. Damon arrived shortly after, walking down the grand staircase with his usual quiet composure. Meera placed the tray before him, keeping her gaze fixed on the floor. "Thank you, Meera," he said softly. Her heart skipped a beat. There was something in the way he said it, not the polite, distant tone of a wealthy employer, but a genuine warmth. Meera nodded and started to leave, but he spoke again. "If music makes you happy, you don't have to stop singing," he said. "It makes this house feel alive." Meera paused, her hand on the door. His words stayed with her as she went about her chores. It was strange, an unfamiliar feeling of being seen, even in a house where she had always felt invisible. Days passed, each one blending into the next. Meera's routine was filled with small chores, scrubbing floors until they gleamed, polishing furniture until the wood shone, arranging flowers in every vase she could find, and ensuring that every corner of the mansion reflected calm perfection. Yet, in these routines, Meera found tiny sparks of joy. Sometimes she hummed quietly while she worked, a note or two from a song she remembered from childhood. Sometimes she caught Damon glancing at her briefly, perhaps noticing something that others overlooked. Even a simple chore folding Bella's silk blouses became an exercise in patience. Meera thought of it not as servitude, but as a way to survive and keep her dignity intact. Of course, Bella was never far behind, ready to snap at Meera for the slightest misstep. One afternoon, she entered the kitchen with a frown. "Meera," I told you not to touch my things, but you've refused to listen, she said sharply. I'm sorry, ma'am, Meera replied, keeping her voice calm. You're going too far with your attitude. I don't know why Damon tolerates you, Bella continued, her words like fire. Meera took a deep breath. She had learned to endure, to nod, to remain silent. But inside, a small flame of defiance burned quietly. One day, they would see her for who she truly was. That night, as she sat on her small bed in the staff's quarters, Meera looked out at the garden. The raindrops fell steadily, tapping on the leaves and pooling in the fountain. She felt a strange peace watching the rain, as if it washed away the heaviness that lingered in her heart. She began to hum softly, the sound of her voice mixing with the rhythm of the raindrops. It wasn't the same as when Damon saw her last, but it was hers, pure and private. At that moment, she realized that her voice, her small joys, could exist without the need for approval. She smiled to herself. Over the next few weeks, Meera and Damon's moments multiplied. Sometimes Damon would join her in the kitchen with a cup of tea. Sometimes he would linger near the stairs, listening to her hum quietly while she worked. They began to share more than glances. In those quiet moments, a bond was formed. It was slow, subtle, and unspoken, but undeniable. One afternoon, Bella returned home. Her voice filled the house like thunder. God, where's my bag? Who moved my shoes from where I kept them? Meera, she called. But when she walked through the staff corridor, she saw a red dress folded on a chair. Meera, she called. Yes, ma'am, Meera answered. You wore this? Yes, ma'am. That was. You wore this around my fiancé, she shouted. Do you think you're better than me? Damon intervened. Enough, Bella. You don't have to speak to her that way, Bella gasped. You're defending her? I'm defending a human like you, Damon said quietly. For the first time, Meera realized that Damon's attention was more than polite, it was protective, and something she could trust. The morning light seeped softly through the tall windows of the mansion. Meera awoke before sunrise, as she often did. She dressed in her usual uniform. As she lingered in front of the mirror, adjusting a stray strand of hair, her reflection showed a young woman who had endured much, yet still retained a spark in her eyes. Maybe, just maybe, today will be a good day, she whispered to herself. Damon descended the staircase, his usual calm demeanor in place. He paused as he saw Meera carrying a tray with breakfast. She almost tripped over the rug, and for a moment, he thought of how delicate yet precise she was in every task. Good morning, Meera, he said softly, with a smile that reached his eyes. Good morning, sir, she replied, keeping her gaze lowered. He noticed the faint blush on her cheeks, the way she held herself with quiet dignity. Something in him softened further. Do you like strawberries? He asked suddenly, pointing to the fresh fruit on the tray. Yes, sir. I like them very much, she said. He picked one up, placed it delicately on the edge of her tray, and smiled. Then this is for you. Meera blinked, surprised. Her heart fluttered. This was a small gesture, but it carried meanings beyond her role as a maid. That afternoon, while Meera was arranging the library, Damon appeared quietly behind her. The room smelled of polished wood and old books. You're very good at this, he said. Meera jumped slightly, then smiled. Thank you, sir. I've always loved books. He nodded. I can see that. You treat everything here with care. Not just the house, but everything you touch. Meera paused, her hands resting on a stack of books. I learned early that care matters, even when no one is watching. Damon watched her for a long moment. I've noticed you, Meera, more than I've ever noticed anyone in a long time. Her heart skipped a beat. She swallowed, unsure what to say. His words were heavy with sincerity, something she hadn't experienced before. I don't know what to say, sir. she murmured. You don't have to say anything, he replied. Just keep being who you are. Over the next week, Damon's small gestures multiplied. A cup of tea left on the kitchen counter just for her. A quiet compliment on how she polished the silver. Even simple words like, "Good morning," or "Take a break, Meera," carried warmth that melted the walls around her heart. Meera noticed everything. She began looking forward to these moments, to the quiet presence of someone who seemed to see her for the first time. She started leaving small gifts for him in return: a fresh flower on his desk, a cup of cocoa when he returned from late meetings. These gestures were subtle, almost invisible, but they were her way of saying, "I see you too." Of course, Bella's shadow loomed over the household. She returned from a short trip, immediately noticing the subtle changes. "Who told you to put these flowers in the study?" she demanded, her voice sharp. Meera looked up calmly. "No one, ma'am. I thought it would brighten the room." "Brighten the room? You think you can just change everything while I'm gone?" Bella's voice rose, trembling with anger. Damon stepped in, his presence quiet but firm. "Bella, this isn't a matter of permission." Meera was only doing something thoughtful. Bella gasped. "You're defending her again?" "I'm defending someone who has respect for people," Damon said, his voice calm, unwavering. Meera's heart pounded. She had never been defended like this before. Damon's words were a shield. "You'll regret this, Meera," Bella said. A few days later, the rain poured steadily outside. Meera sat by the window, humming softly as she cleaned. The house smelled of wet stone and polished wood. She remembered her mother, humming the same lullabies. And for a moment, she felt her presence. Just then, Damon entered holding a cup of cocoa. "I thought you might like this," he said, handing it to her. "Thank you, sir," she replied, smiling faintly. He looked out the window at the rain. "Do you ever feel trapped in your own life, Meera? Like no matter what you do, nothing changes?" Meera considered the question. She had felt that way often, especially as a maid in a house that sometimes felt like a prison. "I've learned to live quietly, to find joy in the little things," she said. Damon nodded. "I envy that. I have everything I could want, yet I've never known peace like this. Watching you, it reminds me what life should feel like." Meera's heart raced. She realized he wasn't speaking about wealth, or status, or the world outside. He was speaking to her heart, her soul, her being. That evening, they sat together on the balcony. The sky was painted in gold and pink as the sun set, and the distant city lights began to flicker. "I've never met anyone like you," Damon said quietly. Meera smiled softly. A long silence followed, filled only by the sounds of the wind through the flowers and the distant hum of the city. "You're more than a maid, Meera," he continued. "You're someone who brings life to everything you touch." She felt warmth spread through her chest. She didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. The next day, Meera was cleaning the balcony when she spotted Damon sitting on the wooden bench in the garden with his cup of coffee. The evening breeze rustled the leaves around. Meera walked slowly towards him, curious. "Do you come here often?" she asked softly, looking at the flowers that swayed gently in the wind. "Not often enough," he replied, handing her a cup. "It's peaceful here, though. Away from work, people, everything." Meera sipped the tea, savoring the warmth. "It feels safe here," she admitted. Damon looked at her closely, his dark eyes thoughtful. "You make it safe," he said softly. "Even this small place feels different when you're here." Meera looked down at her cup, unsure how to respond. She felt something stirring, a warmth, a pull, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Over the next several days, Damon began sharing small pieces of himself. Stories from his childhood, moments of loneliness despite wealth, and even small, embarrassing experiences at school. Meera listened carefully. fascinated by the man beneath the calm, confident exterior. She shared pieces of herself as well, stories of her mother, the lullabies she sang, and the small joys she carried with her despite life's hardships. They laughed softly at simple memories, and for the first time, Meera felt a friendship forming a bond deeper than that between employer and maid. One afternoon, a sudden rainstorm trapped them inside the mansion. The world outside was gray and wet, but the kitchen glowed warmly with sunlight that filtered through the windows. Meera was humming quietly while folding a stack of freshly washed clothes from the washing machine. Damon watched her for a moment, smiling at the way she moved with quiet grace. "You dance well," he said softly. Meera's cheeks flushed. I don't know how to dance, sir." "Then dance for me," he said, stepping closer, gently taking her hand. Her heart raced, but the warmth in his touch was comforting. Slowly, hesitantly, she began to move to the soft rhythm of her humming. Damon tried to match her movements, clumsily at first, and they both laughed softly. The rain tapped on the windows, the scent of wet earth filling the room, and for a brief moment, the world outside didn't exist. It was just them, moving and laughing, hearts quietly opening. Meera had begun staying up later, sometimes finishing chores, sometimes just sitting quietly in the staff room. Damon would occasionally knock softly and enter, bringing a cup of cocoa or a small snack. "Why do you stay up so late?" he asked one night, settling beside her on the small wooden bench. "I like the quiet," she admitted. "It reminds me of simpler times." He nodded, looking thoughtful. "I think I understand. Quiet can be healing." They spoke for hours that night, about dreams, fears, and the things they had learned the hard way. Meera felt her heart opening in ways it never had before. And Damon's words carried a gentle acceptance that made her feel valued and safe. One evening, Meera was tending to the flowers in the garden. Damon approached quietly, carrying a small plate with a few delicate pastries. "You work too hard," he said softly, handing her a treat. Meera smiled faintly. "It's part of my life. I've always worked hard." He knelt beside her, carefully trimming a rose with a small pair of scissors. "I admire you, Meera. Not just for what you do, but for who you are," he said quietly, his voice steady, carrying a warmth that made the garden feel lighter. Meera's eyes met his, wide and searching. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the rose she had been arranging, the petals brushing against her fingers like a delicate secret. She felt a flutter in her chest, a mix of disbelief and hope. "You really think so?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, as if speaking louder might shatter the fragile truth of the moment. Damon took a small step closer, careful not to crowd her. "I do," he said softly, his dark eyes holding hers. Meera's breath caught. For the first time, she felt seen not as a maid, not as someone small in a big house, but as herself, and that this bond with Damon was becoming something that went beyond gratitude or kindness. One afternoon, Damon invited Meera to sit with him in the library. She hesitated at first, unsure of whether it was appropriate, but there was a gentleness in his voice that reassured her. "I thought you might like to see some of my favorite books," he said, gesturing to the shelves. "Perhaps we can read together?" Meera nodded, taking a seat across from him. As he read aloud, she noticed the way his voice changed when he spoke quietly, the subtle warmth in his tone. For the first time, the distance between employer and employee seemed to vanish. When he finished reading a short passage, he looked at her and said softly, "I feel lighter when you're near." Meera's chest tightened. She didn't know how to respond. All she could do was nod, feeling her heart speak what her lips could not. For the first time, Meera allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, someone could see her, care for her, and want her not just for what she did, but for who she was. "You know," Damon said finally, his voice low, I've never met anyone like you, Meera. You, you make life feel lighter, brighter, and safer. You know, Damon continued, his voice softer. I think I've started to care, more than I expected. Meera's breath caught. She looked at him, her eyes wide, heart pounding. She had never imagined that someone like Damon could feel this way about her. I feel the same, she whispered, barely audible. For the first time, the distance between them disappeared. The mansion felt alive, the stars brighter, and the world outside irrelevant. Tears filled Meera's eyes. She had never felt seen so completely, so tenderly. A few weeks later, Meera stood in front of a mirror wearing a cream dress and a small gold chain. Her eyes looked bright, not tired anymore. Downstairs, Damon waited, nervous but smiling. When she walked down, he said, "You look like the reason this house is finally alive." 80. He opened a small box. Inside was a silver bracelet. "It is not a lot," he said. "It's a promise." "A promise of what?" "That you'll never have to hide who you are again. That you belong here." She held out her wrist. He placed the bracelet gently on her. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for teaching me how to listen," he replied. They stood close. No music. No words. Just heartbeats. Months later, Damon invited Meera to a grand gala. She walked beside him, wearing a cream-colored dress and a delicate gold chain. Heads turned, whispers floated through the crowd, but Damon held her hand proudly. "Who is she?" someone asked. "This is Meera," Damon said with quiet confidence. "My guest." Meera noticed some smiles, some raised eyebrows, but Damon's attention never wavered. Across the room, Bella saw them. She smiled a cold smile, then turned away. Meera looked at Damon. "She saw us." "She already knew," he said. Later that night, the night air was quiet and kind, as they sat on the balcony beneath the tall flowers. Under the garden lights and the scents of blooming flowers, Damon and Meera sat together, looking at each other gently. He turned to her and said, "Do you remember the day I first heard you sing?" he asked. "Yes," she said softly. "That was the day my heart finally woke up," he said, as he smiled, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yes," she said softly. He opened a small velvet box. Inside was a shining ring. "Meera," he said softly, "you brought light into my home, and peace into my heart. I don't want you so far away from me. I don't even want to risk it. And right now, all I can think of is, Meera, will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes. Her heart swelled, unable to speak at first, and finally whispered a soft, "Yes." He smiled, and then slipped the ring on her finger. They hugged, then danced slowly under the lights. Meera hummed the same lullaby she once sang alone in the kitchen. Now, it belonged to both of them. It feels different now. Meera was no longer just the maid. She was loved, cherished, and finally, at peace. The mansion had transformed with her presence and their love from a place of cold silence to a home filled with warmth, laughter, and music. Sometimes, the people we overlook are the ones who carry the light our hearts need. Meera and Damon had found each other, and in doing so, discovered that love and goodness can grow even in the coldest places, when hearts choose to see beyond pride, class, or appearances. Thank you so much for watching. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And, also, subscribe for more stories like this.